Hello and welcome to the Intentional Clinician Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Krauss, licensed professional counselor. In today's episode, I'm very excited to bring on Dr. Isaac Bentwich, MD, who is the translator of Gita, a timeless guide for our time. Those of you who are interested in philosophy and spirituality and how that integrates with psychology will surely enjoy this episode. Dr. Isaac Bentwich is joining me from his home in Israel. He is a longtime practitioner and teacher of yoga and meditation. Trained as a physician and a scientist, he has founded 3 life science technology companies, leading revolutions in medicine, genomics, and environmental conservation. He is the former head of the Innovation Center at Technion, recognized as one of the top 10 innovative universities in the world. The vision and innovations that underline the companies he founded came through periods of silent meditation retreats at the foothills of the Himalayas and in the Galilee region. His path is one of reverence to the wisdom teachings that shine through different traditions and religions. The study and practice of the Gita's wisdom teachings has profoundly touched his life, and he is passionate about sharing this with others. His work on this translation of the Gita spanned 12 years. The Bhagavad Gita, often referred to as the Gita, is a 700-verse Sanskrit scripture that is part of the Hindu epic that I can't really pronounce, but Mahabharata is a dialogue between a disciple and master. The disciple, Indian Prince Arjuna, is called to fight a defensive battle against vicious family members who are out to kill him. Shaken by a moral dilemma, he seeks counsel of his teacher and friend Krishna, who is also God incarnate. With this dramatic battlefield backdrop, the master leads the prince from the worldly starting point of the prince's despondency to a captivating, brilliantly clear account of the meaning of life, the source of suffering, and the paths to happiness and self-fulfillment. We cover his translation of the Gita and so much more in this episode of The Intentional Clinician. All right, here's the interview. Welcome, Dr. Isaac Bentwich, to the show. I appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And so I am excited to tell the listeners about the book that you published in 2019, the new translation of the Gita, or also known as the Bhagavad Gita.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you.
And I am eager to discuss the Gita. I was not very familiar with it, except for kind of cultural references that I'd heard in the U.S. And then I've also been doing yoga on and off since about 2001. So people had quoted the older translations of the Bhagavad Gita, but your new translation is actually called Gita, a timeless guide for our time. And it being an ancient Hindu scripture, I thought that was really interesting. And I've enjoyed reading your thoughts that you have in the introduction, as well as some of your personal comments between chapters of the translation. But I would love for you to kind of fill us in about your story, maybe a little bit about the background of how you got into reading the Bhagavad Gita and then eventually translating it.
Okay. So I'm a medical doctor by training and a high-tech entrepreneur by profession. And yoga and meditation have been a central pillar in my life. I first met the Gita in a yoga teacher's training course 30-something years back. It was a month-long intensive course out in the desert in Israel. And I loved almost everything about it. The one thing I hate, the meditations, the yoga, and one thing that I really hated were the daily Gita lectures. So this was my first interaction with the Gita. I was very much connected to my Jewish roots and have a lot of a deep connection and respect to Christianity and to other religions, but I didn't really connect to this whole war thing. We'll talk about the Gita and its overall story in a moment, but the mythology, etc., this didn't really capture me. And it was only gradually and later that Gita became really a big love in my life. So that was how I first interacted. the Gita.
I really resonate and love the story about the fact that you first hated it when you first heard it, and then eventually became your love, and then eventually a book that you actually published. Because I find oftentimes, especially when we're younger, but anytime really, we come up with a judgment about something, and we have this preconceived notion, or just maybe an initial judgment, and then if we sit with something long enough, our opinions or our thoughts process can change about it. And I've talked about this in my podcast. When I first was doing a certain type of counseling, like I was working with substance abuse, I thought it was worthless and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And now I've learned that experience has helped all of the other types of therapy I've ever done, and helped me help clients that had nothing to do with having any substance use issues. So I'm excited to see how that changed for you. So I do think we should give a little background, like you said. And there's plenty of things people can read on the internet about the Bhagavad Gita, but can you tell us a little bit about the background of it and what is it essentially?
Sure. So the Gita is an ancient scripture. It's high up there next to the Bible and the Quran. It's one of the world's most read and most translated, and most printed and translated texts in the world. And it is a text that can be viewed in many different ways, as a historical document, as a religious document. My translation treated it as a manual for inner development, which is what I believe it really is. And so, yes, it comes from the Hindu tradition. Yes, it is associated with yoga. We all know yoga in the West, but in the West, yoga has become primarily in fitting with the vibration and the interest of us people in the West, has become something more external, getting a firm butt, getting your body flexible and then the shape, and you feel good with your body when you do some stretching, etc. Yoga is at the Gita is at the very heart of the deeper and broader sense of yoga, which is the totality of paths for inner development, inner journey. The text itself is a text that describes a dialogue between a disciple and a master. I called this translation Gita a timeless guide for our time, because it truly is a dialogue between master and disciple, and more importantly, between us and the inner voice of our soul. And so it is timeless. It has nothing to do with well beyond the historical connotations of this or that figure. But anyway, a dialogue between master and disciple. The disciple is a prince, Indian prince called Arjuna. The master is his friend, his charioteer, and God incarnate. And so in typical Indian imagination, here's a dialogue and an invitation. If you had the chance of having an afternoon chat with God, what would you ask? And what would God respond? Where God is not some fearful bloke in the sky that's wrathful, but rather truly the inner voice of your own soul. And so it's a dialogue with you, of me, of any of our listeners, with the inner voice of our soul, which is the essence of life, or God. The dialogue happens in the most unlikely of settings, which is why I was put off by the text initially, and many people misunderstand it. It's at the battlefield. The prince is being attacked by vicious family members who want him dead, and he's torn by the moral dilemma to fight or not to fight. being a pacifist and not wanting to kill his relatives, even if they are bad people, is the opening statement for the Gita. Why hold a philosophical discussion like this at the battlefield? That sounds crazy, right? I mean, we're used to think of other religions or other similar dialogues. This is not the Mount of Beatitude, Christ overlooking the Sea of Galilee. This is not Buddha under a Bodhi tree or in Sarnath with a collection of a few disciples pondering the questions of reality. This is Corona time, right? This is in the middle of a battlefield. It's you and me here and now in the world. And so that's what makes it so utterly real. It takes us from philosophizing to philosophy in the most urgent and direct sense. When you're in the midst of a battlefield, it's sort of a freeze frame. The battle is about to ensue. The disciple asks the master, "What should I do?" And the master, and then it sort of freezes, and the entire dialogue happens in the split frame between as the battle is about to ensue. And what follows is a poetic, and that's another striking feature of the Gita. Not only is it a discourse in the meaning of life and the search for happiness and the technique of meditation and all of that, it's a poem, 700 verse poem. So being a medical doctor myself, I've always thought of the Gita as sort of, with the accuracy that it has, like a neurosurgeon's manual to the mind and its working, and yet written in the form of a poem. And not coincidentally so, because unlike our culture, it's basically taking us beyond intellect. And the way to do so is by working through art and intuition and feminine energy and poetry. And so it's a beautiful 700 verse poem that discusses these truths that are as relevant today as they were then, and I dare say they're even more relevant in our here and now, with the commotion and turmoil and difficulty on many levels that we're experiencing. We all have our battlefields in life, and so this is the taking us to the analogy of that battlefield there.
That is just lovely. It reminds me of some of the things that you were writing in the introduction, but it's just very nice to hear you to talk about all of this. And it did strike me when I started reading it. I thought, wait a minute, we're on a battlefield. That was actually a thought I had. I was like, what is this? I was thinking, there was gonna be some Zen poetry going on, like a Rumi poem or something, because exactly like Christ, preaching and whatever. But it was, he was definitely in the middle, about to have this battle. And then it was interesting because a lot of the thoughts he was expressing to the master, I was thinking, well, if I was about to have a battle, which I don't really want to, I would be happy. He has all these myriad of different reactions to it. Yeah. And then it sort of leads him into the teaching. And one of the things that struck me was you were talking about intellectualizing. So a large part of Western culture is we have become addicted to information and knowing things and believing things, but we've kind of disjointed that from the application and the experiential. So I think they say one analogy of wisdom is knowledge applied or information utilized. And I've found that in therapy, while I do different types of therapy for the psychotherapists out there, I find that experiential work sometimes is the most powerful, and actually really interesting things come out of that. And yet it seems like clients don't often want to do that every week because it's so intensive, and it does get them in touch with their inner their inner part or inner soul, as we could call it. And so this book has obviously been around for a long time, and in many different translations. And I was looking through here about how many people have been reading it, and I was thinking, this is like a list of my favorite people here. My favorite Beatle, George Harrison, Leonard Cohen. I love his songs. Beethoven, of course. John Coltrane, Philip Glass. I got to see him play a concert a couple of years ago. It was wonderful. Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Barack Obama, Deepak Chopra, Carl Jung, who's Carl Jung's name comes up a lot on this podcast, and a surprising one, Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, and many other people like T.S. Eliot and J.D. Salinger, up to, let's just go here, Jim Carrey and Hugh Jackman, who are newsworthy if you listen to popular things. So this has influenced and inspired quite a lot of people, and the entire kind of practice of yoga. So it's very obviously transformational and interesting, and it's, when was it, 500 BC or something like that?
Yes. Yeah. They say 500 BC. It's actually encapsulating philosophy that's 5,000 years old, but that's about the date that has been put in writing.
So I want to enlighten our listeners on your viewpoints. I don't know which three to go through. Yeah, there was three things that struck me in your introduction. The three interesting parts about your translation, and also the 3 points of the Bhagavad Gita. So maybe let's start with how your translation is different and updated in many ways. Could you speak on that?
Look, there are well over 200 translations in English alone, and then many more commentaries, and many of them are excellent translations. This is merely my offering of yet another version. What apparently turned out to be quite unique about it is that, and this was coincidental and not intended. I've started working on it really to stay sane in life and through the turmoils of life. So it was my sadhana, or my inner practice, and I fell in love with the verses and found out for myself that the way that they're written in poetic form is not coincidental, because it is meditative. Each one of these verses, one of the great commentators refers to these 700 verses as 700 pearls strung on a string, like a string of pearls, where each one is a pearl of wisdom, beautiful and complete in its own, and related to the pearl before it and leading to the pearl after it, and yet independent on its own. And so in my experience, I've very much connected with that. They are pearls of wisdom that that do their thing in your mind. As a very loved and appreciated Tibetan teacher, Lama Yeshe, one of the people that brought Buddhist Tibetan Buddhism to the West, that says when you think of mantras as something foreign, don't think that this is something that's technical, or that you're using mantras every day, he says. But rather than using the mantra pizza, 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 or money, 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 why don't you do something more useful with your life? So coming back to these pearls of wisdom, they are seeds of wisdom that roll around in your mind. And so back to your question about this translation, one thing that turned out to be quite unique about it is that it is the first translation that captures in English the original meter and rhyme of the poetic form in its origin, while attempting as best as I could to capture the essence of this is a practical guide for inner wisdom. And the third aspect, so these are two foci of this translation. The third is that it was written so that it speaks equally and directly to men and women alike. My work on this translation spanned 12 years, now quite a bit more than 12 years. And so one of the things that struck me is that with this being such a universal scripture, it didn't really make sense that it's all written in male form. This was something that maybe was okay in the past, but really felt that it should speak to men and women alike, and so that was part of the journey. An interesting anecdote related to this was how I stumbled my own journey with the translation on the poetic side. I started scribbling verses because I liked them and I meditated on them and so forth. And as I knew nothing about the poetic format of the text. Out of my ignorance, I read some translations. I didn't know anything about it, but it appealed to me to try and put them in poetic form. And the wonderful thing is that as I was doing this, I gravitated towards the actual meter in which the scripture was originally written. Out of pure ignorance, I didn't know this. 4 lines of 8 verses is... And so it's sort of the scripture itself drew me to the meter and the importance of it. And so I yet again started and translated it to that exact meter. And then I started hearing the music, as it were. You can actually hear it when you we'll read a few verses to give an example, but. There's a music, there's a rhythm to it, which helps practically in going beyond intellect and leaving intellect behind and going into the realms of intuition and through poetry.
Yes, I love that. Bringing it to more into the feminine and masculine together voice. I think is more needed now than ever. We in the United States and a lot of Western culture has been experiencing a renaissance of the feminine traits that we discarded while we were trying to make a quote unquote better world through progress, whatever that is. And then as this is obviously not a show on this, but oftentimes if you grow up in the patriarchy, you don't realize that you've been told to not have emotions as a male, or don't listen to your intuition, listen to your plans, listen to what you want. What you want is most important, not what the community wants. And not to split things, but feminine principles going back to ancient times are more concerned with the community and making sure everyone has enough to eat, and listening to your inner voice, and also what is the trade-off of progress. And it's ironic to me, living in a Judeo-Christian dominated country, that Christ was actually preaching many feminine principles, but they've been reinterpreted through a patriarchal lens. So this is a breath of fresh air, because, back in the times, I don't know all of the history, but a lot of times in certain religions, the men were the spiritual teachers more. Not that there were many women, but a lot of that's been erased, obviously, from the history books. But I'm glad that you brought that out, because I do believe that we need the feminine principles brought forward more than ever, and then to unify that with the masculine principles in a Jungian type place, where the males, the male, or I shouldn't say male, sorry, the masculine principle. I'm not trying to make it gender, but I just said that because I've been programmed, sorry. But that the masculine principles respect and uphold the spiritual principles of the feminine in a way that actually is inclusive of everyone on the planet, all humans. So I love that.
At the heart of the all of the ancient traditions is this union, respectful union of the two energies, the two aspects of who we are, the masculine and the feminine. When we sit for meditation in many traditions, it is guided to hold your right palm within your left palm. This is how the Buddha is sitting. And so this is submitting the masculine right side of our body, left side of our brain, being submitted and caressed and held within the confines of the feminine side of us. So so the Gita is the ultimate. People don't often know this, sometimes don't know this. Hatha yoga, the term hatha is actually hata, sun and moon. And so hatha and yoga is merger. And so yoga is marrying unifying the two aspects of our being, the masculine and the feminine.
Wonderful. I love that. So I'm excited to get into some of the relevance for today, but I think we definitely should inform some of the listeners who haven't maybe read the Gita about some of the main points that are talked about in the Gita, just to kind of give an idea of how this could apply.
Sure. So the Gita is a practical guide for inner development. It comprises 18 chapters that are divided into three sections or three paths. The first 6 chapters is the path of action. The second path is the path of devotion. Devotion / mysticism / intuition / emotion. And the last path is the path of wisdom. Wisdom being not non-intellectual knowledge, non-intellectual wisdom. The wisdom that comes from transcending intellect and knowing who you are. And so, in a nutshell, that gives an idea of the themes that the Gita is dealing with. It starts with the foundation of the what I'd call the art of living life wisely. How do we live our lives such that every day, every moment, every instance, every crisis is a learning experience that allows us to set the foundations for overcoming the ego. In a nutshell, that's what it's all about. All three paths deal with the same thing. You mentioned that in your audience there's psychiatrists and psychology is therapists are a part of the in the intersection between psychology and philosophy. Gita is guiding us or inviting us on an interesting direction. In Western philosophy, in Western psychology, ego is the centerpiece. It is assumed to be not only very real, but that which we are serving. We want to be happy, and so who are we? We are the ego. Gita is gradually taking us on a radically different journey, starting with baby steps. This is the beauty of it. It's meant for me and you, not for some sages in a mountain, not for enlightened beings, but for ordinary people like you and me. Taking the first baby steps, but taking them in the right direction. And so right direction meaning gradually toning down and eventually transforming and going beyond ego. The action path starts the way by emphasizing how we can leverage activity in the world to be altruistic activity, not so much self-centered, being more focused in the here and now, not being drawn by fears and anxieties of the futures or troubling thoughts from the past, but just do it, as the it says. A second path goes into the realm of mysticism and poetry, to really encourage our intuition that sees the unity around us. As we were talking, I'm speaking from Israel, and I'm just looking out at the setting sun on the Mediterranean. So when we look at the setting sun, or when we hear the laughter of the babies and the blooming of flowers, all of the emotions, the positive ones, the sad ones, it steers us, and when we it helps drawing us out of ourselves, out of this never-ending, busy story of judgment and thoughts and projections, into an awe of wow. There is a unity around us. There is something sacred, even if we don't know what it is, whether we're atheists or belonging to this religion or that belief. There is something there that is spirit, that is not just, that is the forest and not just the trees, that is uplifting. That is God, if you want to call it that. And then the third, and so that takes the next step. And then the last, the third path of the Gita, path of wisdom, takes us further of inquiring, who am I? So who am I really? I'm obviously not this collection of small-minded thoughts and judgments and memories. I think I am that. It's a challenge for therapy. I think if psychology has changed dramatically in the West over the past 20, 30 years, from being very much ego-centered to something that's more holistic. Still, it's a radical view, understanding, or the notion that happiness can come by overcoming ego altogether, harnessing it, using it as a servant, but not being a slave to it as a tyrant. And so that's the third notion of the Gita.
There is so much richness in what you were saying and summarizing so well. I can definitely see that all this study is just percolated and made a very nice reduction for this podcast. And so, these podcasts, as you know, are just a little sampler, if you will. If you go to a restaurant and all you eat is a sampler of a sandwich, you're still going to be hungry. So for the audience out there, I would say, one of the ways that we are transformed is through experience. And so, but it's never, it doesn't seem to be transformed in a logical ego way. We have to be open to experience. So for instance, I've been trying to dedicate my mornings to reading and stretching and playing music and different things like that. And some days, I just did it. Okay. And and I'm deleting the social media stuff. So that's great. So I just did it instead of listening to that. But other days I feel totally transformed. I have poetry, different books I read and things I do. And some days something strikes me. But even further, what you did and what people can do, and maybe I will do, because I was reading the Gita on a little vacation. And so I was reading a lot at once, which is not actually possibly, I mean, it's one way to do it, but I'm not getting everything from it, right? It is a devotion, so to speak, a devotion to a practice. And the practice that I was kind of hearing you saying was that you would read passages and meditate on them. And from that, from my experience, I often get many different layers. I have my first layer of thought. Maybe I have an ego reaction. Maybe I have an emotional reaction, spiritual. But if I dwell on it long enough, it starts to sink into layers that can only be described if you've gone there. And so I would say to people out there who are, just reading lots of things on the internet or just listening to podcasts and never jumping in the pool, but just putting your toe in to see how warm it is, try an experiential practice. It can really, really transform your life as it did for you and for myself, just not in one book. I'm a little bit scatterbrained when it comes to books. So, I love books, but I'm always reading 6 at once. So whatever that means, but that's kind of my makeup. So I wanted to talk to you about some of your comments about, we were talking over email, and you had talked about how relevant, how the Gita could help us right now. We're in a worldwide pandemic that is continuing. We have various financial crises depending on what country you're in, but pretty much everywhere. Social distancing is happening to make sure that the virus is not spreading as rapidly. And then in the U.S., we are in quite a strange situation where a lot of truth is being spoken about, long overdue, about society and sort of racial tension here, and also lots of other things going on. We have an election here, which is going to be a great bunch of fun. I'm sure. I'm sure it'll be very easy and calm for everyone involved. So more meditation than ever. So I wanted to hear kind of, because you're the expert on the Gita. I mean, I've done yoga and I've done some meditations and all this business, and I love, reading, but I don't have the layer and depth of wisdom. So anything you want to talk about related to maybe a lesson that you feel that we could learn from this?
Sure. Look, I'm not an expert on anything, but
okay.
It really is feels to me like super timely in these confusing and difficult times. Many of us or of people close to us losing their jobs, the uncertainty around it, and that which we in the Western culture have rarely get exposed to. I live in Israel, so I've been in life and death situations, but most of us in the West, we take life for granted and it's pretty easy. And all of a sudden, a tiny virus out of nowhere throws everything into this mayhem, and even our very life is in danger. And so, all of a sudden, out of left field, this scripture, which starts in the midst of a battlefield, doesn't seem so far off or irrelevant. In fact, we feel torn by these questions. And to sort of address what you're asking, let me take you to a few verses from the beginning of the book, the beginning of the dialogue. The prince is in tears. His life is in shambles, as is ours to some extent right now. He is confused, as we are. He's not facing election year, but he's facing enemies out to kill him, which sometimes feel frighteningly similar to whatever our political denomination be. And so I won't read the whole thing, but after a sort of a stump speech, which you mentioned earlier, Paul, of the disciple asking the master, but in doing so, being very knowledgeable and articulate and opinionated on his stump. We should do this. We should not do that. What should be done? And then a grace of the divine happens, and he breaks down to I don't know. And he says, a veil of pity routs my heart. Mine's dark. Where does my duty lay? Guide me, master. What ought I do? I'm your disciple. Show me the way. And so thus spoke the brave warrior prince, conqueror of sleep, master of will. I shall not fight, he added, and then spoke no more and was still. Then to him, between the two armies, disconsolate by these tormenting trials, the master ruler of senses spoke, wearing the faintest of smiles. And so the prince is in shambles, crying out in his anguish, and the master's response is a smile, a thin Buddha-like smile. What are you smiling? I asked you a question. What should I do? What should I vote? What should I do? How shall I cope with my work? What shall happen? All of these questions, and the master is answering with a Buddha-like smile. And then comes the next few verses, which give us a tasting. You mentioned the sampling of the buffet. They give us a tasting of how this works, of these verses of wisdom. And so the master says, you speak words of wisdom, O prince, but your sorrow is in vain. For the truly wise never mourn, neither the living nor the slain. There was never a time we were not, me or you or these enemy kings, nor can there be any future in which we ever cease being. And so a total pairing of is sort of beginning with throwing the disciple to what I call the deep end of the pool of examining the most basic assumptions. You're not this body, dude, he's saying. You're not, nor am I. What seems as a conflict, rather than going into we live in this world and we have to act in this world, and we're not going to run off into any cave, but to do so effectively, let's get back to first principle of who we are, and then we can act effectively in this world. I'll read just one more verse here. Senses contacting their objects cause feelings of heat and cold, joy and pain to evince. They come and they go, they never last long. You must learn to bravely endure them, O prince. And so rather than being sucked into the myriad of questions, should I do this or should I do that? And all of that will come with advice and then pearls of wisdom of how to act and how to feel and how to, like training ourselves like a young child learning to walk again, training our hearts and minds how to walk. But it starts from... let's observe what is happening. You're not the body or mind. Senses contacting their objects cause feelings of heat and cold, joy and pain to evince. They come and they go. They never last long. You must learn to bravely endure them, O prince. The pandemic is a grace of God. Every difficulty in life is grace. Because we are under the tyranny of ego, which is spellbound by this fascination of our judgment. This I like, this I don't like, this I will control, as though we were the masters of the universe. What are we? Nothing. The world exists 13.8 billion years. We're here for an instant. And so participating in this magical, not to beautify or to smooth over, to gloss over the difficulties that and the pain that we're experiencing and that others are, the social duties that we have, the political duties that we have, and the role we must play, but to do so from taking a step back and from a deeper peace within which we must find. And in that sense, times of turmoil are actually a good thing. Very difficult, very painful, but they're a lesson brought to us to allow us to flex our muscles of the heart. If meditation, whatever form it takes in our lives, is something that remains when we're serene and everything is cool and quiet, then that's of limited benefit. It's at times like this which are difficult. Our minds are troubled, our meditation are shot through the window, we're it's difficult to keep our calm, and we should accept that. But and so words of wisdom like the Gita help us through these troubling times, and more than that, they help us grow using these troubled times as stepping stones.
Yes, I like that. Nobody I know likes to learn through suffering, but that's how most people learn everything, because you can go to school or learn the right steps by watching others. But until you actually experience it, you're not sure how it's going to change you. And right now, a lot of people are suffering, and there's that principle that, the darkest storm is always before the beautiful sunlight. And so I do think that there's something to experience, but we do need tools to get through this. And it's so interesting how universal the Gita is, because it reminded me of this passage in this Buddhist text that I'm totally going to butcher, but essentially it's saying fame and blame, pain and pleasure, loss and joy. These are all part of your human experience. And so the Gita is sort of saying, just like the Buddha, which I just butchered that passage, but essentially look at the higher perspective, or like Christ sort of saying, like, why do you worry so much about everything, all these, he wouldn't say first world problems, but I'll say Western first world problems. Why are you worrying so much about this? What are you going to eat? What are you going to wear? Look at the birds of the field. Are they not fed? Look at the flowers. Do they not blossom and then go away in an instant, and the grass is burned up in a moment? And don't you think that God would watch over you even more and understand? So I think in our human ego tyranny in and of ourselves, and unfortunately sometimes egos are governing us as well. We're happening to start narrowing our perspective of life to we are the center of the universe, and kind of trying to push our will around instead of understanding and taking some time to reflect on what's occurring. And I can see it since the beginning of the crisis in the U.S. Well, it was way before. Yeah. Since March, when they shut down, most states shut down here in March, that people have been having lots of difficulties and sort of going to a base stress response. For a lot of people, that's eating and drinking more, or using drugs and alcohol, or in the U.S. we have this new drug called Netflix, and it's all around the world now. I'm just joking, but you can watch all of these stories, right, and escape, which is not bad, right? And other people have thought, well, I think what we need to do is we all need to figure out our true path, and we need to redecorate our house, and we need to, other people are protesting. So people are finding both outlets that are non-destructive and destructive outlets with this crisis. And so I do believe that the Gita and what you were saying has a lot to teach us about how do we suffer. We're going to suffer regardless. If we're born, we're going to suffer. So how do we do that?
Yes, and I like what you're saying. And let me read another verse here that gives you a different flavor from this dazzling array of tools that with the Gita is a toolbox. And so just to give you a flavor of all right, okay, so I'm not the body, I'm not the mind. You may realize it, I'm not there yet, and the mortgage is due, and I'm out of a job, or I'm stressful and free from my life. What do I do now? How do I get to that point, even if I accept that this is a worthwhile? And so here's a verse that typifies this whole first six chapters of the path of action, of how to work in the world. And so it says, you have the right to work, O prince, but not to the fruits this work breeds. Never work for fruits of your labor, nor to laziness ever concede. Such beauty within these words. Here's something that's completely first-based stuff, right? We're here. We have to work in the big context, both making up our bed and then making breakfast for the kids, or working for our livelihood. You have the right to work, O prince, but not to the fruits this work breeds. Never work for fruits of your labor, nor to laziness ever concede. Abandon clinging to your work's results. Act always heart united with the divine. True yoga is the art of maintaining in success and failure an even mind. So basically saying, look, don't think of this of today of the crisis as something that we have to just hold our heads above the water and get through it, and then we'll do spiritual work. This is spiritual work. It's here now. Every action, everything we do, every work job, day job, work day, or family chores is an opportunity to practice this, such a sublime and difficult and challenging task. You have the right to work, O prince, but not to the fruits this work breeds. Can we even imagine something like this? Everything we work for its fruits. This is how we're conditioned. This is the change that we're invited to start in baby steps. On the way to becoming a Beethoven or an Einstein, you start with scales. You start with algebra. And so our algebra, our scales of the piano are the daily work. Trying to do so more focused on the present, less obsessed with the work results. And the virus is a great gift in that regard, because hey, guess what? You can obsess about the future as much as you want, or plan, and out the window it goes for things that are out of your control. What are you going to do? And so live your life, do your work as first he says as something that you have the right to do, but not owning the results. And then there's even an invitation to do your work as a prayer to that which you believe in, whatever that shape that may take. And so even cutting tomatoes for your salad becomes sacred, becomes a way into sanity. Watch your Netflix. This is fine, but do so in an aware manner. I'm not this body. I'm not this mind. I'm going through my day. I'm trying to think of others and not just of myself. How can I be of service and not just what will please me to do so? And trying not to numb ourselves to sleep, but to awaken through every day that we live.
Beautiful. Just to tie in some psychology, Carl Jung said, I don't have this in front of me, something like most people go through their lives sleepwalking and only are on autopilot. I think and then only for a few moments awaken and then go back to sleep again. And I think that's the invitation. And I grew up in the Western culture, and even more so when I was young, I was told that belief in certain principles of the orthodoxy of Christianity was the point and not the practice of it, because the practice doesn't matter as much as being part of the club. That was the message I got. And so it took me a long time to break out of that mindset and to understand that the practice is what it's about. And then getting even more, it's so difficult if you've been trained this way. Through yoga and meditation for years, thank goodness at my university, they had free yoga classes everywhere, and meditation classes and whatnot. And they were, secular or gym based, and they had a few people reading Sanskrit or whatever here and there, a couple of the teachers. But to really try to be mindful in the moment was a challenge because of all the messages, whether it's in the media. Back then it was television. The internet wasn't really popular back then yet. And of consumerism and, plans. And so I found it difficult. But two observations I will say is that since the virus started, time has seemed to slow down, and in a good way.
Yeah.
And part of me didn't like it, of course, and a part of me is loving it. Part of me felt oppressed because I felt that I had to learn everything over. I have to wear a mask. I have to wash my hands more. I can't touch my face. I touch my face all the time. I'm a chronic face toucher. I got to stop that. Got to give up that addiction. I need to stand away from people and find my little group, my little COVID-19 tribe where we can actually hang out. And who is that group going to be? And how do I do that responsibly? And how do I report? And, I run an office here. We have temperature guns. We have masks. We have all this stuff. So how do I do that? Every day I'm learning something new. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't, this is so much. But yet it brought me so much into the moment where I started going, wait a minute, this is an opportunity. And what I've noticed is it's brought me more into playing with my dog. It's brought me more into conversation with my wife. I've shrunk my circles of friends that I speak to, and not in a bad way, just I'm really more in deep conversation with multiple friends. And so I think it can be an opportunity if we don't look at it with this Western progress attitude of, well, I can't wait to get through this so we can go back to normal. And of course, Greenpeace and other people that I follow are saying, or other organizations are saying, we don't want to go back to that normal. We want a normal that's more equitable for all beings on this planet. And there's many ways to get there. So I'm happy about that. And I'm sad about everyone suffering who's getting the virus. I had a friend who passed away from it in March, and I've had 3 friends in the ICU. And then I have to, in the US, there's a prominent conspiracy theory that it's not true until it happens to you. But anyway, so that's sort of infuriating. Lots of emotions coming up. Luckily, my 3 friends are now recovered, or mostly recovered, I should say, not completely. But it's a real thing. And I think it's touching people's lives in so many ways. But because of the, at least formerly slow spread in the northern part. Well, in the northern part of the United States, it's sort of slowly spreading. In the South, it's spreading like wildfire. But because of that, it doesn't always hit everyone's life in a real way, except for the inconvenience. Yeah. And so I've been telling 2 last comments. I've been trying to tell people, use it as an opportunity. These regulations are not an oppression. They are an inconvenience to save someone's life that you'll never meet. And by taking care of yourself and your health, you are actually taking care of other people out there that you don't know. And number 2, this is just a fun comment about the Western mindset and something you said earlier, the planning, and the trying to get it our way instead of surrendering to what is happening in the moment and having a process. There's a quote, I don't know who said it, but they said, when a man makes plans, God laughs. So I don't know who said that, but
no, that's lovely. And I join very much what you're saying, and I think that this is a great opportunity. Every moment in life is an opportunity, but this is on a global scale unprecedented for us. It will go away, and it will, with whatever transformation into the new normal, whatever that may be. But the current phase is a gift which we should cherish and utilize. Sooner or later, we will be back to rushing and then being busybodies. And so while time is slowing now, while we're in danger and so are attuned to our mortality, to the finality of life, to the uncertainty of life, to the unknown, the great unknown. These are all the ultimate settings. This is why the Gita was written as the Gita. Where when you're facing a battlefield, you have 0 tolerance for BS. You have 0 tolerance for philosophy as in the context of theories. And so this is the global mindset that we're put in right now is a wonderful opportunity for growth. Let me perhaps read a few last verses that give a tasting of the 3rd element of the Gita. It's part of this chapter on yoga of meditation. Meditation and mindfulness many of us have tasted or practiced in some shape or form. Gita is the essence of meditation, and so here goes. So it says, yoga parts us from pain, O prince. Pain we thought would always be there. Practice it therefore determined. Be joyful and never despair. Yoga here, not in the sense just of the physical yoga, but the overall, the culmination of the all paths of inner journey. Utterly abandon desires, prince. Know they all arise from your thought. The wild pack of senses restrain, discerning what's real from what's not. Patiently, O prince, bit by bit, let one gradually calm one's mind. On divine inner self focus inwards, not letting the mind wander round. Time after time mind will stray, outward by senses drawn away. Time and again it be withdrawn, focused on inner self alone. And then one last verse, then does such purified heart know bliss that's beyond what senses can, established in this reality, never to wander again. So it gives us a flavor of both what meditation is about, and here in the context of what we just spoke, Paul, of meditation in the worldly aspect of it, of daily life. As you're going through your routine, and you've made your resolutions, I want to be more mindful, I want to be happy, to content with what I have, I want to try and live less in my fears and judgments and then the anxieties, and more in serving, and then as the Gita says, time and again mind will stray, outward by senses drawn away. We will be drawn by the next chocolate or Netflix or gossip or thought process. We're addicted to these thought processes. Time and again mind will stray, outward by senses drawn away. Time and again it be withdrawn, focused on inner self alone. When we find and train ourselves to focus more inwardly, we feel what you've reported of finding greater peace, even within the turmoil, in little things, in the friends, in the small circle of friends that we have, in family, in love, in work, but from a less hectic and more grounded place, hopefully.
Yes, that is very wise and beautiful. And I hope from hearing this that listeners are excited to pick up your translation or any translation of the Bhagavad Gita. But I recommend Isaac's translation. So that's just a little thing on my show. But and try to have a practice. I do love the simplicity of the poetry because it speaks to the way our mind works, which goes to show you that modern psychology doesn't have everything figured out, which is probably why they're going towards mind-body work now. That's the new trend.
Yes.
And taking the ego out of it and all of that. But it's got that simplicity, and it's a reminder. And I think we all need reminding daily. I need reminding multiple hundreds of times a day. So
that's it. Listen, this is what is so uplifting about this scripture, and it is really a guide for life, and the one which is meant for to be at your bedside and to have a verse be pulled on a daily basis, or whenever the need strikes you or inspiration strikes you, and different tools that help us get through the day.
Wonderful. I don't have too much else, except I was struck. I wanted to point out to the listeners that it seems like that Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States was actually inspired by the Gita and a lot of the nonviolence, as was Nelson Mandela. And I found that useful, especially in the United States, as we are working on reforming the relations and also how our city police and municipalities and social programs treat people. So I find that hopefully that can contribute.
Yeah, just to add to what you're saying, the great civic rights movements. You mentioned Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. Said he was inspired by Gandhi's movement and viewed that non-violence as the basis for the civil rights movement in the U.S. Nelson Mandela actually read the Gita in his prison cell and says that that's what kept him alive. Gandhi attributes everything that he has ever done to the Gita. When you're in San Francisco on the pier, there's a statue of Gandhi walking the pier with a quote by Einstein, which I really find moving. Generations to come will scarce believe one such as this in flesh and blood has walked the earth. And so this giant, Gandhi, that set all of this in motion, everything that we know about civil rights ties back to this humble man. And he says, it's all the Gita. He says, my life is about the Gita. The movement is driven by the Gita, and it's not about non-violence as much as it is about seeking truth. He called it satyagraha, the adhering to truth being that inner self, which allows us in times of turmoil right now. This is not a lecture in history of civil rights. These are very practical lessons for us here and now. With the social divide, with this extreme tears in the society and threat to democracy and all of that, being able, as Gandhi and Martin Luther King have inspired us to see everyone as human beings, the opponent as human beings. And so it's not just the coin of, okay, let's do this non-violent or this. There's something much deeper than that. It can only be not non-violent, truly, as much as you inquire and we inquire, which each inquire inside and connect to that spirit within, which is common to everyone. And then there is no aggressor and the grieved, or there is a unity that brings them together to transcend this and to. So this is not utopian, but actually very, very relevant and very difficult tasks. And so texts like the Gita hopefully can be of help.
Yes, I think during this time of change, we will need a lot of help and a lot of wisdom and centering, because especially people trying to make change, the power structures are not usually in favor of changing the status quo. So if anybody's out there who's trying to make change, you do need a guidepost in the center to go back to, and the Gita helps you get back to your own. And so, yes, I love it. I don't really have any more comments because I think you've just laid it out beautifully, and I think people need to go read it and experience themselves. Is there any advice you have to any listener who is wondering, how do I read the Gita? What should I do? I'm a little lost, kind of like the Prince, maybe.
My advice. The book itself is accessible. This specific translation, as well as other translations, go look them up on the internet. This specific translation, once again, is Gita, a timeless guide for our time, and it is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all of the other outlets, and is available in book form, and audiobook, and the ebook. The advice on a very personal level, read it, if you may, as an autobiography, as your autobiography. it is a book that's written eye level for each and every one of us, not as some historic manifesto, but as something that simply echoes truth that you already know, and an inner dialogue which you're already having with your inner self. And read it slowly, a verse a day, a chapter a week, or what I found useful is repeating the same chapter every day of the week. It only takes a few minutes. It's a small book, deceivingly small. In this translation, I've also tried to make it accessible, and so at the beginning of every chapter, there's a small introduction. So it's not this intimidating thing of, oh, should I go and study philosophy, or this is complex? No, it's the prince. Each one of us is the prince or princess of the Gita, and we're invited to this inner journey, which is our life.
Great. I'm hoping people listen to that part. I'm going to try to actually reread it a lot slower because I was speeding through it, but I loved it. So thank you so much for your time, Dr. Isaac Bentwich. And it's just been a pleasure and to have you on the show. And I could see the sunshine coming, or the sunset coming in on your face, and it looked very nice. So I'm hoping you're enjoying it and staying safe there in Israel.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And then one of the good things about these difficult times is that it is bringing us together. And so to all of my brothers and sisters in America, we are all in this together, and let us grow and pass this safely, keeping our safety of health and attending to the physical needs, and hopefully better and easier times will come soon. Let us make the most of these difficult times before they go away. Now is our time for growth. So thank you for having me, Paul. So I enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you so much. And there you have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician Podcast. If you've been enjoying it, please share it with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. And if you haven't already, subscribe or give us a rating on iTunes. Until next time, I'm wishing you all a safe and peaceful week. If you are looking for an EMDRIA consultant, I am now an EMDRIA consultant in training, and I can provide 15 of the 20 hours needed to become EMDRIA certified. I'm going to be starting an EMDRIA consultation group, both online and in person. It is looking more like October to December 2020. For details, check out counselingsupervisorgr.com or healthforlifegr.com, or email me. The Michigan Mental Health Counselors Association is working to increase the availability of quality mental health services statewide, increasing education, promoting best practices, and working to keep licensed professional counselors and other professionals accessible by the public. They are currently working with the American Mental Health Counselors Association in attempting to get licensed professional counselors finally covered by Medicare, which would help a lot of people out there that are on Medicare right now and cannot see a counselor. They can only see a psychologist or a social worker, which means that people are not getting the care they need. Also, we are working to integrate into schools and try to get more health out there. I know a lot of people are talking about different ways to change the police department and get mental health responders to be going to the calls. And I think this is something we should be working on a legislative place to be able to help our communities by getting first responders who are mental health experts. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based upon the literature they have read and their experience in the field, they should not be viewed as the definitive opinion on the subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you are in crisis, please dial 911 or the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-8255. Are you a young person of color feeling down, stressed, or overwhelmed? Text the word STEVE, STEVE, to 741-741. That's Steve to 741-741, and a live trained crisis counselor will respond to you. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment with a local counselor in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area at Health for Life Grand Rapids and the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com or give us a call at 616-200-4433. Also, thanks to the secure online platforms that we now have access to and the changes of insurance companies due to COVID-19, anyone in the state of Michigan can work with us online if they have a need. And it works out. So you can also utilize your insurance or self-pay, whatever works for you. We'd be glad to help you. All right. Thanks for listening.